Got a lot of new coaching staffs out there, so naturally, we got to rank them before they've ever coached a spring practice. Now, what I want to remind you of when we rank coaching staffs around here, I'm not just ranking the head coach, although it is primarily about the head coach, but when we're ranking them, it's not all apples to apples. If I were to compare Brent Venables at Oklahoma to Mike Elko at Duke, for example, I'm not going to expect one to match the other in an apples-to-apples resume comparison because one's got more resources than the other. But as you're watching, if you're watching on YouTube, there's a whole list on the side of your screen about new coaches in new places. So you quickly look down that staff list there. How would you rank these using these 2 bullet points? I want to know their capability and I want to know the impact. And we obviously factor in expectation level here, but I want to know the impact. So here's where I went. This is very fluid. I reserve the right to change this after spring. The number 5 new hire for me, we start in Oklahoma. It's Brent Venables. A lot of synergy here. If you've heard me talk about Arkansas, you've heard me credit the synergy that the program has under Sam Pittman. Well, the reason I mentioned Arkansas, because it feels to me like when I've listened to Brent Venables and I've sort of felt the early vibe out of Norman, doesn't it feel to you a little bit like Brent Venables in Oklahoma have some of that Sam Pittman, Arkansas type juice going on? I can't explain it. That's why I use the word synergy. It's very intangible in nature. Can't hold it in your hand. Can't quantify it. A calculator will not spit that out to you. But it just feels like from the moment that Brent Venables arrived in town, everyone looked and said, yeah, he feels like Oklahoma. That's a very good thing because that's what they were looking for. They, being Oklahoma, had a guy leave in the middle of the night. Didn't see it coming until it was too late, and so they wanted someone who knows Oklahoma, but that's only part of the equation. They got to have someone who loves Oklahoma too. And Brent Venables, I think it's very clear, checks both of those boxes. So he feels like Oklahoma. I'm very sure he loves Oklahoma. He knows Oklahoma intimately. He'd been out there for a while. He went and perfected his craft at Clemson and became one of the most sought-after coaching minds and coordinators in America. And now here he comes and he gets an opportunity here. It's not the first opportunity. It's just the first one he took. Very important to note. This wasn't a guy that was reaching just one last gasp effort to try and become a head coach. He had his pick. He turned down several big-time jobs, which makes it all the more important to note Oklahoma's the one he selected. It wasn't just a meeting in the dark. He selected Oklahoma. There's a big difference, though, and the reason he's only at 5, I say only in quotation marks, the reason that I put Brent Venables as the 5th biggest hire on the old power ranking scale is for the standard reason why I keep an eye on any first-time head coach, and that is the key difference that exists when you move from the passenger seat to the driver's seat. Some guys do it seamlessly. Some guys realize this is not for me, and so I don't really care about his age. I don't really care about any of that. I only care about what it takes to be a head coach, and it's the added burden of responsibility, and you just never know until you know. I know Oklahoma folks are very confident. I'm confident in him. He wouldn't be on this list if he wasn't, but it's a common hesitation that I have. When you look at his resume, though, there's a lot of time at Oklahoma. I mean, from 99 to 2011, he was out there. So he knows it intimately. He knows what works out there. Brent Venables at Oklahoma, that's number 5. Now, here's where I know it's going to get a little controversial, but I'm just going to throw it out there and we'll adjust on the fly as we need to down the road. I got Billy Napier at Florida as the number 4 hire here. Obviously, a lot of the feedback I've gotten this afternoon would indicate that a lot of our viewing audience and listening audience will disagree and they'll want him to be higher. This is very lofty, so let's break down Billy Napier at Florida right now. I think a lot of people are mischaracterizing Billy Napier at Florida. I think a lot of folks are looking at Marcus Freeman at Notre Dame, Brent Venables at Oklahoma, and they're just kind of throwing Billy Napier in there, and those are not the same. But they're thinking about Napier almost like a coordinator. A conversation that I've heard a lot of people have, they talk about him as if he's some unproven commodity, like we got to wait and see how he does as a head coach. Dude, he was 40-12 in 4 seasons at Louisiana. You know how he does as a head coach. Then you get the pushback that I never buy into, and that is, well, he hasn't done it at this level yet. At this level is all relative. They used to say the same thing about Chris Peterson when he was at Boise. Yeah, he wins in Idaho, but he'd never do that in fill-in-the-blank conference. Well, when you say that, you've also got to acknowledge that if that coach ever came to your conference, he would have that conference's resources. And so Billy Napier killed it at Louisiana. And by the way, when you talk to anyone behind the scenes, the two attributes that they always pointed out about Napier is he is a very, very good developer, but he's also a very good evaluator of talent. They didn't whiff a whole lot. When you translate that skill set and a proven commodity, formula works, when you translate it to a bigger job, he gets bigger resources. And so it stands to reason the formula to win is the same. You just have to inject a little bit more in terms of resource into it the higher up the ladder you climb. But it's a very competitive league. Hey, Billy Napier put together a very competitive staff already, including inventing some new roles that we've never heard of before. But look, he has, and I want you to pay close attention to this because this is important at Florida. You've always heard it said, everyone wants to win, but Florida's got a way they want to win. Well, a lot of that's true. And the good news for Florida fans is Billy Napier kind of gets that. He views the program the same way the fan base does. He has the same energy they do. He views it through the same prism they do. The recruiting approach, I can guarantee you, is a lot more in line with what Florida fans would want than the previous regime. And he's not chasing monsters in Florida right now. Mario Cristobal's at Miami, but Mario just got to Miami. Mike Norvell in Florida State, they're not locking down top 5 classes right now. So it's very much a remains to be seen type deal in Tallahassee. And that's good news if you're Billy Napier. There isn't a Nick Saban or Kirby Smart type entity in the state of Florida right now. Their task is to flip the script when it comes to in-state recruiting. And it's very early on, so it's still kind of, the jury's kind of out on that. But at the very least, he feels, and he kind of carries himself the way Florida fans want their coach carrying himself. It's not like recruiting's an afterthought. It's going to be an every day a year type deal. Let's move on here and let's go to number 3. This got really controversial. So I want to hit the reset button here for just a second. So earlier today, and I want to get a very, very updated number here to share with you. We're recording, well, we're actually live, but it is 7:09 p.m. Central Time Thursday night right now. I put this poll up 2 hours ago, and I asked, out of Brian Kelly and Lincoln Riley and Mario Cristobal, what is the best hire of this cycle so far? We've got nearly 13,000 votes in the last 2 hours. And right now, Cristobal leads the way with 43%. Lincoln Riley's second at 39%. Brian Kelly's third at around 17%. As far as my list goes, I do have Brian Kelly third. This is one, though, that I feel like I have the widest margin for error on, because it's certainly not going to be shocking to me if we look back on this segment in 3 years and he ends up being the top choice. So I'm going to tell you why I have him at 3. First, I'm going to tell you what I don't have. I have zero question about his blueprint. The whole fit, the question of whether he'll fit there, I'm going to talk about that a little bit later in the show. That's laughable to me. I dismiss that entirely. I have no question about Brian Kelly as a football coach, as a football mind. I have no question about how he organizes an entire, not athletic department, but certainly a football program. I have no doubt about his approach to the game, none of that. Okay, so that's good news. That's out of the way. He's proven. We don't have to worry about that. This is a guy who played for national title in 2012. He played in the playoffs 2 more times at Notre Dame. A lot of you looked at that and said, yeah, but he didn't win anything, and thought that was underachieving. I looked at it and said, it's overachieving that he was there to begin with. What stopped him? What stopped him from translating those appearances to championship wins? It's very obvious. Comparable talent level. So anyone with even a novice eye could tell that. Well, that is why he's at number 3 right now. Not because of what he didn't accomplish at Notre Dame. The tell on Brian Kelly, and what will ultimately determine this, is the caliber they recruit at. They cannot get by on just recruiting pretty good. They know that. He knows that. This is not breaking news to anyone down there. He's put together a pretty interesting staff, and he's put together a really good mix of some SEC experience, but also some pro experience. They had, I thought, a pretty good finish for their first signing class, signing day about a month ago now, I guess, at this point. But what keeps him from number 1 right now is my inability to know whether they're going to recruit at a really good level or at an elite level. And we say that knowing full well that they got to go against Alabama every year, Texas A&M every year. They got to go against Florida every year. That's their cross-conference rival. And that is the only part, and I mean the only part about Brian Kelly that remains to be seen for me. Now, we got a question again, like I said a little bit later in the show, about how they've carried themselves so far down there. Well, there is some reason to feel very optimistic about LSU recruiting. Again, very, very early. But they've they've put together a staff down there that they feel like is equipped to do a couple of things. And that's number one, retool that roster. There's significant work to be done there. This is not just an automatic plug and play. You know, it's not start from scratch, but it's certainly not plug and play. And number two, they feel like they can do that, but they can also recruit very, very well. And I'm interested to see it, because if they do, you know, if they take care of that second part and all the other parts are out of the way, I have no question about that. This is going to end up being your number one candidate on this list. And that's even if the other two pan out, because there's limitless potential for Brian Kelly at LSU. Limitless potential. This could be the top program in the country. Limitless potential. Moving to number two. So this is where I differ from our poll. This is splitting hairs at this point. I put Mario Cristobal at Miami as the number two hire. Impact is factored heavily here. Remember the criteria. We're looking at capability and we're looking at impact. This was a hugely impactful hire, not only for Miami, but for college football. The two itches that Miami has long tried to scratch have been nostalgia and desperation. It's all you ever heard over the past 20 or so years when people talked about Miami. They talked about the U, they talked about the documentaries on ESPN, and talked about the 80s and 90s. And then they talked about how they'd love to get back there, but they never really scratched those itches until now. And I think it took one of their own being successful on the national stage and then available and willing to come home, not only for them to scratch those itches, but also for the big money types down there that previously had sat on their wallet, they talked, but they didn't spend, to finally say, okay, if we can get him, you got us. What do you need from us? And that's an entire dynamic shift in South Florida. That's what's happening down there right now. That's why everyone's so excited. It's not just that Mario Cristobal's here. It's that he's here and we know what it means. And that whole what it means, you don't have to see it right now. You know, down in South Florida, they know. It's not like we're going to win a national championship this year, but there are going to be pieces that we are acquiring from the high school ranks and maybe even the portal to some extent that are going to help us contend for that down the road. But look at what he walked into. Look at the entire situation at Miami right now. This is what I mean by impact. Not only did they get a guy who's one of their own, but also he walks in, the ACC's wide open, NIL is here, which should greatly impact Miami, disproportionately positively impact Miami. Big money folks are stepping up, and also I view Miami as one of the top transfer portal destinations in the country. Firstly, because it's just easy to attract anyone to South Florida, but really, if you think about the portal any given year, you could have some talent that left South Florida and went anywhere from Alabama to Texas or anywhere in between that gets back in the portal. Well, the default is you want to go closer to home. That's the first thing they're going to think. So think about the kids who Miami may not even grab on the first try that end up wanting to come back home. South Florida is a really good place to be parked in the NIL transfer portal era. So Mario Cristobal at Miami there, number two. That leaves only one. And let's see, Lincoln Riley narrowly finished second in our poll earlier today, but he's my number one hire of this cycle. Lincoln Riley at USC. What part of the hire is not a grand slam? You can convince me the other ones are a big deal, but in every department, this is a grand slam hire. And it establishes a track record now that you haven't had at head coach. You had a guy who could sell hope, but you have not had for quite a while a guy in the head coaching position at USC that could tell you, I've already done it. I've already won on the highest levels. My approach works and it's already proven because I can point it out to you. They've got that now. So they got that. It's proven. It's a commodity that's already proven. They're able to be positioned in the weakest Power 5 conference right now, let's call it what it is in college football, so they could rapidly ascend to the top of the totem pole out west. They can leverage NIL by simply using their backyard because they're parked in Los Angeles. What part of this is not a grand slam? And also, specifically, think about the quarterback talent that's left South Florida. Think about the quarterback talent he has coached, he being Lincoln Riley. You would have to really struggle. It would take some mental gymnastics to me to not call that the biggest and easily the most impactful hire of this last cycle. So 1 to 5. I went Lincoln Riley at USC, Mario Cristobal at Miami, Brian Kelly at LSU, Napier at Florida, and I went Brent Venables at Oklahoma. Now let me tell you 4 names that just missed out here among several. Mike Elko at Duke is one that's off your radar. I know you're not paying attention to it. Mike Elko is probably pretty uniquely built to win at Duke. mind you, not the ACC, but to win at Duke a little bit higher than maybe the expectation level. There's a guy Troy just hired named John Summerall. A lot of folks, myself included, thought he may get a shot last cycle. Watch him at Troy. John Summerall. Don't think he'll be down there long. Think his name's going to pop on the national radar before too much longer. Marcus Freeman, obviously, at Notre Dame. And Dan Lanning at Oregon. You know, Lanning at Oregon is interesting right now because there's two differing schools of thought out there. I talked about this on the Late Kick Extra podcast the other day, so I won't spend much time on it. But there are some people wondering, is it really as easy as just plugging and moving right along with the way Mario Cristobal is doing it? Because you see, conventional wisdom would tell you Oregon is not a major recruiter. Oregon, based on your map of the United States and where all the talent is and where Oregon is, Oregon should be a developmental program. That should be the place where they have to take backup options and develop them. Well, they haven't been that. Oregon has been the exception to the rule. Oregon has been parked in the Pacific Northwest, but they've attracted elite talent. They are going to try and continue that with Dan Lanning and the staff. He's put together a great staff of recruiters. So for that reason, he's on the list here in the top 10. But those are some of the big hires. And now we get towards spring practice, and we finally get to see guys with their teams for the first time, and they get to see their teams for the first time, and then we get to have spring games, and then come out of those spring games and look at the transfer portal, and there'll be all kinds of last-ditch efforts in the transfer portal.